take us back to this year and what was your claim? What did you say, and what were the reactions?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shayla, for this invitation. For me, it's very important. It's a great significant because I was born the year the Berlin Wall fell, and it's not because of that. It's because my father founded the movement to fight for human rights on the island, inspired on the perestroika, inspired on the winds of change that came from Europe. And that wall was turned down after 36, 38 years of division and oppression. And we have been 65 years behind our own iron curtain, our own thorn curtain, actually. One that survived the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fact that especially the West, tolerated for how long? And for so long, a dictatorship in the island actually have had very, very green consequences for the rest of the Americas. We wouldn't be talking about the collapse of democracy in Venezuela and in Nicaragua without the Cuban regime. And that regime killed my father in 2012. My father was a leader of the opposition. He had been fighting for decades already to bring the right to decide to the Cuban people in an initiative called after a hero of the Cuban independence, the father Felix Varela. And he created a project inspiring him to provide the Cuban people with an alternative to demand human rights. And when I say human rights, I'm talking about very basic human rights: freedom of expression, freedom of association, the possibility to have small enterprises, the possibility to participate in free and fair elections, the liberation of the political prisoners. And the answer of the regime was repression, was putting in jail all the citizens that collect the signatures for that change. And then to kill him and a dear friend, Harold Cepero. Harold was younger than me when he was killed and 35 years old. Harold was 32. He was driving with my father when state security cars, when the Cuban Stasi start to persecute them and then impact their car from behind and kill them. That happened in 2012. I wasn't able to leave the island.
Only 12 years ago.
That was 12 years ago.
One has to remember this.
Yes, we have to remember this. They haven't been the unique victims of that regime. That regime kept killing people after they killed my father and Harold. That regime kept putting people in prison after they killed my father and Harold. That regime kept preventing people from traveling and from abandoning or from leaving the island after and before. It was until 2013 that I could address the United Nations Human Rights Council to get very disappointed on them. It looks more like a club of dictatorships than what it should be. It should be a place where democracies have a voice. And what happened that day was that the Cuban regime mission stand up and ask to the president of the commission to shut me up.
Yeah, exactly.
And after that, the Chinese mission, the Venezuelan mission, the Pakistani mission, all of them stand up to say, please, President, do what the Cuban mission is asking. Mm-hmm. That was the treatment that I received in the Human Rights Council in United Nations at Geneva. That's the reality that we Cubans face, and that's not only the reality of the Council in Geneva. I'm sad to say that that's the reality also in Berlin. How many Berliners know that Cubans we still live in East Berlin? How many Berliners know about that?
Let's talk about this because I don't think many know this. Yeah, I don't think many know this, and that's why it's important to stress this has only been 12 years ago. This Human Rights Council meeting that you mentioned is only 11 years ago, where you were basically tried to shut you down, mm-hmm. Claiming or talking about what happened to your father. And I think the perception it has to be corrected. The
Yeah.
image that people maybe have of the recent history of Cuba, especially, which I think is part of a big history of opening up. Ever since the fall of the Berlin Wall, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, there is a big story of opening up countries. And I think Cuba was always part of this story. So the perception of the Cuban state and state of democracy, I think, is different from your story.
It is. It is. The Cuban people have been the victim in the crossfire between the propaganda machinery of the Cuban Revolution and the romantic ideals of the European people that believe that propaganda. But to actually confront the reality, or at least be honest enough to see what the Cuban people have been suffering, and the struggle of the Cuban people. That story hasn't been told, or at least hasn't been told enough. The narrative that we see is prevalent in Europe is the one that was created, but the same propaganda machinery that actually manufacture a pop icon called Ernesto Che Guevara,
Yes.
as an icon of the international left and the international youth, to be honest, when he was a killer of Cubans, when he was a racist and an homophobe, someone that actually hate freedom, and is being venerated in the free world, even here in Berlin, when he's a repressor of Cubans and many more. That propaganda machinery, which I believe is probably the better archive, or the best achieved propaganda machinery of the 20th century, is the one that have been leading what you know about my country, and those are lies. Those are fallacies that are permanently preventing the good people of the world to be solidarious and to be effective in that solidarity with the Cuban people. As the East Berliners had, and the East and Central Europeans had at some point, the solidarity of the world, the Mr. Gorbachev turned down that wall. Well, we also as human beings, we also deserve that solidarity. And in part because of that propaganda, we haven't been able to enjoy that.
That's absolutely right. I think part of it also played the recent sort of liberalization of relations between the U.S. and Cuba, which led to a big boom in tourism, sort of like also again feeding into the image of a country that is opening up and that is very liberal.
Yeah, that's also part of the propaganda, and it's hard to say it. It's harder to live it, but people go to the island as going to the zoo to see the old American cars that nobody actually would drive because, well, electric. Technology is better, but Cubans has no option but to risk their life in cars that are from the 50s, and some of them are moving because they have been reforming and reforming again and putting gas instead of gasoline because they need to move. And that portrait have been sold to Europeans and to Americans and Canadians. What happened during the Obama administration was a change in policy of a foreign country, which is the U.S., but nothing changed for Cubans. Well, actually, that's wrong. Yeah, in terms of repression, it got worse for the Cuban people. In 2014, there were about 100 political prisoners. Today, there are more than 1,000 political prisoners in Cuba. My friends are in prison. We were just talking about one of them. We were just talking about Sailin Navarro. Sailin Navarro is my age. She's a leader of our movement, of Cuba Decide. She has been in jail for almost 3 years. His crime? She went to the police station to ask for the whereabouts of the people that disappeared the night before in the protest. That was his crime, her crime. And she has been in jail for 2 years. She's one out of more than 1,000, probably much more. We can only register those that are connected with the dissident movement or with the civil society. But the most part of the political prisoners in Cuba are just citizens that have been peaceful protesters. And we have no way to know who they are or where they are. And the only thing that we have is our voice and our will to be free. But that requires also, as Germans know very well, that requires also international pressure.
Exactly.
And that one is not common.
Yeah, the pressure. And yeah, the pressure definitely has to grow, and also the support and the hearing your voices more. Let's talk about your work with Cuba Decide, because this is also continuing your father's legacy, right? Like you are explaining how to learn to decide, and how to learn how to use choice, and how to learn how to use freedom of speech and things like that. So maybe you can tell us what you're doing, and what did you learn in that process of building democracy?
Well, I have learned a lot, and one of the main um, one of the main things I have learned is that you don't need to teach people how to be free. You didn't, just as you didn't need to tell Eastern Berlin just to cross the wall. We have been seeing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Cubans, the most part of them very young Cubans, 16, 14 years old, in the streets, screaming freedom, screaming down with the dictatorship, screaming change of system. Nobody taught them that. We haven't had free and fair elections in more than 65 years, more than 70, actually. Uh, they were never instructed in what a democracy is, but they are human beings, just as we are here in Berlin, and freedom is intrinsic to the human soul. So they maybe never experienced it, but they know they want it. And they were risking, and they are risking everything that they have, which is, by the way, their bodies. There is nothing more in Cuba right now. The situation is very, very dire. So in Cuba Decide, what we do is that we provide a platform for citizens, but also opposition, organized civil society, to have a path towards that change, one that can be peaceful, one that provides the possibility of participation for everybody, is actually promoting a popular vote to change the system. Why we need to change the system before having free elections? Because the Communist Party forbidden free and multi-party elections to be done. The current imposed constitution says that the Cuban Communist Party is the director of the society and the state. And if you want to change that, you are a traitor to the motherland. So we need to change that before being able to have free, fair, and multi-party elections. So we promote a popular vote to do so. Of course that they don't want that. Of course that the Cuban regime is throwing in jail everybody that proposed this. But that's as hard as it was the fall to be turned down. It requires massive citizen pressure. We are doing that. The Cuban people is doing that, and it requires international pressure to force the criminals in power to submit to the will of the people. It's doable. It happened here in this city. It can happen in Havana. It requires some bravery from part of the international community, from part of those that gathers there and in Brussels. We need them to push. We need them to cut funding to the generals that use those fundings in corruption and in repression. We need them to be
Viva Cuba. Democracia.